Hello and welcome to the Tai Chi Notebook podcast. Happy New Year. My guest today is Alan Wycherley, who has a YouTube channel called In Defense of the Traditional Martial Arts, and he's a Tai Chi practitioner. He's done a few cage fights back in the day, and he's very interested in the way that Tai Chi can be used as a reality-based self-defense system. So, here he is. Hi Alan, how are you? It's good to see you here.
Hello, yeah, it's good to be here. Always good to get the message out.
So what is the message? What is your YouTube channel all about?
Well, so my YouTube channel, In Defense of the Traditional Martial Arts, I started it during lockdown, actually, or maybe a little bit after lockdown. I got back into doing Tai Chi. I hadn't practiced it regularly for well over a decade, I'd say. So I started going online to learn, relearn the form that I was doing, well, different forms. And it came back surprisingly well. But when I was doing those searches, I came across a lot of, how to put it politely, bullshido. And so I decided to repurpose a YouTube channel that I had when I was doing stand-up comedy. And I thought, right, I'm going to change this into a martial arts channel. And basically, I feel like Chinese martial arts, especially internal Chinese martial arts, most of all, need defending from most of the people that are currently practicing it.
That's quite funny.
Yeah, because I thought I was going to have a lot of trouble convincing, like MMA guys or jiu-jitsu guys or wrestlers that Tai Chi can work. But what I find is it's easy to convince them because you do something and then you say, right, there you go, this worked. And they'll go, oh yeah, it did. I still think it's rubbish, or maybe it does have some value, but yeah, it works. Whereas you show traditional martial artists a application that or a technique that you do, and then you get them to say, well, that's not real Tai Chi.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, here's the form, here's the application of the form, you can see where the application comes from, and I can make it work against a resisting opponent. No, it's not Tai Chi. Well, can you show me what Tai Chi looks like? No. And so the only option is, okay, let's meet up and you show me on camera. And that's what I'm trying to do.
You have actually done that step that most of us haven't bothered with, which is to actually meet up with people who are usually convinced of their own either rightness or superiority or something, and you've kind of asked them just to try it out on you. How's that gone?
Well, to be fair, I mean, I've only had two people take me up on it. One nice gentleman who his ideas are in the realms of reality. I think it was a bit of a reality check when we had a bit of a spar, to be honest. He realised there is a massive gap. But then the other guy, the Wing Chun guy, that was on a whole other level. And then are you aware of the Far Gym Project on Facebook?
Yes, I'm a member of the Far Gym Project.
Oh, you are a member. Well, that's probably how you first heard of me then, isn't it? So we've been having we've had one meet up. We've got another one planned for February. And it started off really as a chance for some of the Woo artists to turn up and show us why we're so wrong. And that's kind of gone out the window because none of them showed up. So it's now just a chance for us to get together, talk about ideas, and punch each other in the face, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, that's normally the way those things go. They start as a chance for somebody to come and prove something, and then they never turn up. But the people that do turn up kind of have a lot in common and probably want to do some training together.
Yeah, and it's really what's needed. I think is traditional Chinese martial arts are going to survive practically in the coming years, decades, and hopefully centuries. These are the sort of interactions we need. We need a network of people that are willing to put what they practice to the test.
Yeah, just going back to talking about the guy that you met, the Wing Chun guy, I did watch that video. I haven't watched all your videos, but I did watch that one, mainly because somebody else picked it up and was doing a commentary over the top. Some Chinese guy, I can't remember his name.
Oh, Jerry. Fight commentary breakdowns, yeah.
He was doing a commentary over the top, which was quite condescending to the Wing Chun guy, and it was probably over the top. However, the points were valid, the thing that struck me was anyone who says, if you did this, I do that, it's normally a red flag for I don't actually spar.
Yeah.
And all the time he was saying, yes, but if you did that, I do this. And then you'd say, oh, go on, then have a go. And so he'd do something, and then you'd react in a kind of a normal way, and it wouldn't work. And then he kind of still wouldn't admit it didn't work. And and he just kept going around in this circle where you were presenting reality to him, and he still wouldn't have it, you know?
Yeah, I had to keep saying to him, but if we carry on down this line, we're sparring. And he was very adamant that he didn't want to spar because...
Yeah, which is fair enough.
Well, but I mean, his reason for not sparring was dreadful, because his reason for not sparring was, I see red, bro. And
okay.
which is a massive red flag for a martial artist. Yeah, you should be able to control yourself.
Yes.
Even as a teenager, getting in fights in the dirty streets of, Thetford, Cambridge, and Newmarket, I always had control over what I was doing because I was a martial artist. You know, once I got the upper hand, I was very nice to the people I was fighting. It's this idea that you can get into, I mean, I think he's in his late 50s, the idea that he's suggesting that he can't spar people because he just loses it. But he has said that he's willing to come to the next Fajin meetup. And he says, like, he'd be willing to spar if someone else was there to step in. So we'll see if he's true to his word. You'll have to watch this space. I'll do a video on it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand somebody saying, I don't want to spar because I'm worried about getting injured or something like that. But the idea that you can't control yourself and therefore you're too dangerous because you're too lethal for the streets or whatever.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's a cliche, isn't it? And it's been going for years. And that's what I don't understand about a lot of these people is that these same arguments have gone on since 1993 when the UFC 1 appeared, you know.
That's what I was going to say. Somebody commented on my video saying, wow, it's like we went back to the 90s because it was that, you know, it was like, and it's kind of something I bought into myself, and I still think it's true to some extent, is Tai Chi not great from a kickboxing sense because Tai Chi has a lot of grappling in it. Tai Chi not great from a wrestling point of view because it has striking to it. You know, I always saw the strength of Tai Chi before MMA got popular was that it did fight in all of these ranges. You know, there's not a great deal of groundwork in it, but there is some groundwork in terms of, you know, getting a position over someone to finish a fight. Not so much from getting up off the floor if you find yourself there, but you know, all styles have their weaknesses. And at the time, I thought, well, Tai Chi is one of the least weak systems out there. And I think in the style that I was practicing and the style that a few others were doing at the time, that was actually the case. And then we had these arguments, you know, well, I do this and you do that and I do this, and it never happened. Then MMA came along, you know, like it was going on in Brazil for a long time, Japan, it was going on, and then it exploded in America. And these arguments went away because we had the answers to these arguments. But I guess they've now been taken over by, yeah, but I'd poke you in the eye, or I'd, you know, chop your throat, or I'd hit your vital points. And I guess we've now got these organisations like King of the Streets where there basically are no rules. And it's like, well, where are these Tai Chi fighters to show what real Tai Chi is?
I've also argued about your video with a friend of mine who will remain nameless, who is in the traditional arts, and he has a different perspective to me on it. He's very much of the opinion that what you were doing was sport fighting, and what he was doing was like more street-based things, and what you were arguing over was strategy. And my response to that was, I think there's less difference between things that happen in a sport fight and things that happen in real life than you realize, and things either work or they don't.
Yeah, this is the argument I have all the time online, and I quash it basically by asking for proof. Yeah, there's so many cameras around. Everybody has a camera on them nowadays. There's so many videos of street fights. There's so many videos of real horrific attacks that, you know, I've studied for self-defense purposes, and yet I've never seen anyone perform Wing Chun the way it's supposed to be performed. I've never seen these mystical techniques that these people talk about. What I have seen is a lot of techniques that work in real life self-defense situations and in real street fights used in MMA all the time. You know, I've got countless videos. I can show people kicking someone in the head, punching someone in the face, you know, knocking someone out, double leg takedown people, you know, like tripping people up. All of these things that are contained within a sports martial arts dynamic working in the street, whereas I've never seen to this day a proper traditional martial art fight where it looks anything like what people profess it to online.
I guess there's also the issue of, are fights meant to look like forms, which some people would probably say yes they are, but I think they're just mistaken.
Yeah, but again, it's the sense of fantasy versus reality, basically, because again, most of these people, they've never had a proper fight. If they have had a proper fight, it's with a guy that probably has never had a proper fight themselves. And in your head, I know myself, yeah, I've gotten quite a few street fights when I was younger, you know, ego driven, living in a rough London overspill town. I got in, I'd say loads of it, wasn't that many, you know, a handful of fights when I was younger. I worked the doors for a little while. You know, most of the people you come across have no idea of combat. But the other thing is, when you're fighting someone, you also have no idea of how you look. In your head, you know, when I was younger, in my head, I looked like Steven Seagal. I was grabbing people, I was throwing them into bars. The reality was, I just had hold of someone and I was like, you know, shoving them into things.
Yeah.
Didn't look anything like Steven Seagal. You know, when I spar people, in my mind, I look like Izzy from, you know, the UFC. In reality, when I look at myself, I'm a below average fighter. You know, when I look back at my fights, my actual cage fights, it's, you know, it's to a large extent, it's kind of embarrassing. You think, oh God, I could have done that. Oh, why didn't I do this? You know, seeing it for real is a real eye opener. And a lot of these people haven't done that. So again, I always ask for footage, especially competition footage, because do you know Chris Marshall? No, he's a guy out in Seattle, I think, and he's really good at pushing hands competitions, like really good.
Oh, is he quite tall and bald?
Yeah, always wears yellow.
I know what you mean, yes.
Yeah, and every time he uploads a video, and it's not just hit, you know, he'll upload videos of other people competing. Every single time, that's not real Tai Chi. Tai Chi doesn't use effort. Tai Chi doesn't use like force, and it's like it's nonsense. Okay, enter one of these competitions. Show us how you use your effortless force against someone. And I get training is different. You know, pushing hands training should be performed from anything from, you know, just limited touch, no effort whatsoever, all the way up to full resistance. And all of those aspects have something to gain from it. But if you never go to that full force, that full resistance, you're never going to know if your techniques work or not. And I had this discussion last night on Facebook. The guy says he wants to give me a call. I said he's welcome to, because he wants me to go into it a bit more detail. Comment section's not best for discussion. And I was saying there's such a real difference between training in your gym or even going to somebody else's gym to train and competing against someone, or for that matter, you know, fighting them for real in the street. Because you can be playful in a gym. There's no consequences to you losing. You're not coming out of that gym and everybody's going to know that you failed. You go into a competition with a guy across from you. He wants to win. He wants to get that medal. You want to get that medal. You both want to be able to go home and have bragging rights and put online that you've done this and upload your competition footage and show everyone how great you are. All of a sudden, you've got two people who are strong, fit, skilled, nullifying each other's movements. You know, it's no longer going to look like it does when you're training. You're not going to feel like you do when you're training. You're going to get that ego, that adrenaline dump. And as much as we try to kill that, as much as we mitigate it, and the best way to do that is to actually compete, you're still going to feel those things, and it's not going to look great. I've sparred against ex-Olympic judoka Danny Kingston. I even tapped him out a couple of times. If I was competing against him, I wouldn't get close to doing that. That was him playing around with me. It's delusional thinking brought on by just training in your local gym or maybe going to a friend's gym. People need a dose of reality, and unfortunately, most people aren't going to get that until they get into an actual physical confrontation.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there to bring up. First is push hands competitions. We might be getting off track a bit here, but since doing grappling, I look at push hands competitions differently. And to me, it looks like such a limited rule set of wrestling that it's almost not worth doing, because it's two people wrestling, but you aren't allowed to do all the things wrestlers do, like grab behind the head and on the neck, and you're not allowed to like grip things. And it just seems such an odd rule set. To me, push hands is a training device. It's something you use with your students to teach them. But when you start competing in it, it just seems to be, I'd rather people just competed in Shui Jiao or actual wrestling,
Yeah, again, you could kind of argue that would be like saying judo isn't worth competing in because you can't grab legs, or, like we all have rule sets that are restrictive. But I think you're right in terms of, if you're a hungry young fighter wanting to learn how to fight, then pushing hands competitions aren't for you. And I only entered a couple myself because I've kind of come to that realization. It's good. It gives you an idea of what a fully resistant opponent is like. I only ever entered fixed step, which looking back is stupid, because I don't think fixed step pushing hands should exist as a competition format.
That's even more limited, right?
Yeah. It's just so limited that it's like, that's not really going to exist in a actual competition. Even if you're in a pub and you're crammed right next to each other, you're not going to get where you can't move your feet. As soon as people can move their feet, it changes the whole game. What does it matter if as you say, it's a good teaching tool to teach people about balance and where that point of balance shifts, subtly pushing someone until they fall over. But
or just dealing with like force coming in a sort of non-threatening way, that like it's not a punch, it's a push, and then you can learn to deflect. I mean, things like that are useful.
Yeah, no, I think there's something that a lot of fighters could actually get from doing really sensitive pushing hands training, because, like, as we all know, the best Conor McGregor was touch butt Conor McGregor, and a lot of his training back then was pretty similar to a lot of Tai Chi sort of drills and training exercises that we do. And I mean, you're jiu-jitsu, aren't you?
Well, I started with Tai Chi, and then I did Shingi as well, and then did some jiu-jitsu, mainly focused on that until black belt. And then the COVID thing happened, like you, and I really got back into because what else can you do at home but forms?
Exactly.
I really got back into my traditional stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny watching a lot of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu coaches over COVID showing you like exercises to do on your own, and you're like, yeah, that's Tai Chi. All of a sudden it's like, that's what the form's for. So many people put so much emphasis on the form, and it's like, no, forms training is something you can do on your own to teach you about body movement, whole body movement. But anyway, before we get into that, so I just want to say, like jiu-jitsu, as in the jiu-jitsu community, like a lot of it is moving away from the traditional form of teaching of let's warm up, teach a few techniques, then roll for the end of the lesson, and going much more to playful sort of games that people are doing. And a lot of the more successful gyms competing are now going over to that model. So I think that's what pushing hands is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a playful way of training to learn balance, so that when you do dial it up and then go to that full resistance, you've got an idea of how to do things.
Yeah, and a sort of a feel, like you felt somebody else coming towards you, with that kind of thing. All those, like you say, touch but Conor McGregor, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. And as I say, the jiu-jitsu community, I don't know how much you know about this sort of move away from
the ecological approach, right?
Yeah, and it's if you were to say, if you go back 10 years and say, well, we're really going to lock down what we do in jiu-jitsu and we're going to do this restrictive stuff where you can only do this, that, and the other, you'd say, well, that's not real jiu-jitsu, and that's stopping me from doing what I want to do. Whereas like now, it is moving towards that more playful aspect. I don't know how much I prescribe to full-on ecological jiu-jitsu myself.
I think a bit of it's fine, but
yeah.
Equally, if there are like you know how to do an armbar, right? There are things in how you do a good armbar that you would never work out on your own, right? You kind of need somebody to tell you, don't put your legs there, put them here, and it's better.
Yeah.
And they're just universally true. And then if you're going to go pure ecological, you would never correct anybody telling them you've got to put your leg there, right? You'd have to work it out yourself in a game. That might take you 30 years. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I took up jiu-jitsu again. I stopped a couple of years back because I never fell out with my instructor. Like, he's a great instructor, but he changed the pricing policy. I work shifts.
Right.
I don't feel like I was getting bang for my buck. I stopped training for a while. I was always intended to go back. Then a couple of friends from that gym have now opened up their own gym.
Right.
So there's a lot of white belts, like, they're training, because there's 2 black belts. There's me when I turn up, and then there's a whole load of white belts. And as you say, you have to stop them and go, look, you need to clamp me down here, or this isn't going to work. Or
I'll just sit up and it won't work,
Yeah, you give me too much space. Armbar's never going to be applied because there's so much space between, your bum and the side of, like, my body. And if you didn't do that, as you say, like, those lessons would take years for people to learn.
Yeah, it would be a bit like trying to work out the internal side of Tai Chi on your own,
Yeah. Just do some forms, and now we're going to push hands and get on with it.
Yeah, no talking about how to move your body or the way your body is meant to move. Just like, you just have to do the forms and figure it out,
Yeah, and it goes totally off track. But there's some argument to say that being a bit playful and restricting what you can do actually will develop your total game if you actually do train to the point where you're going to take all those restrictions away. And it's something I used to do, like in Dan's classes every so often. It would be, right, we're just going to wrestle today. You've got to get your opponent to the floor and get in a dominating position, and then restart. And I think that's definitely missing from a lot of Tai Chi schools.
Is that Dan Doherty you're talking about?
Yeah.
So you were a student of Dan Doherty's, yeah? Yeah,
I mean, I trained more. I used to go to his monthly seminars that he had, and in the end, I stopped going to those altogether and was going to Godfrey Dornley's classes. I don't know if you've ever heard of Godfrey. He was like one of Dan's right-hand men at the time.
Right.
And I was getting much more from him, because by then Dan was, big name in the Tai Chi world, and he had so many students. To get any actual time with him at any of these seminars was next to impossible. Whereas Godfrey had a much smaller class, and I was learning a lot more from him than I was going to Dan's.
Yeah, that's often the way in martial arts, isn't it? The best way to learn is not to learn off the top guy, but to learn off his right-hand man.
yeah, absolutely. And that was the case. And it was the case when I took up MMA and jiu-jitsu as well, to be honest. Like, I was mostly coached by his right-hand man, and, like, the fights that I won and the competitions I was successful at were usually techniques I'd learned from learning with him. But
he was quite a personality, though, wasn't he, Dan Doherty?
Dan, but I think my views on Tai Chi were very much sort of, I thought, well, because he was doing this is what Tai Chi was. And at the time, most Tai Chi classes in the country, like the vast majority, not most, the majority of classes would have been Dan Doherty's practical Wudang Tai Chi. He had so many classes and networks up and down the country that was just the case. So even in competitions, what I was seeing was pretty much, Dan's students performing Dan's Tai Chi. And so I thought that's how everyone trained. That's what Tai Chi was. And then when you see, like, a lot of the Yang stylists, pretty much they do form, they do standing meditation, and they do a bit of pushing hands and or like structure testing as well, and that's it. And then they think they can fight
because they've got a big name to attach it to, like in history.
Yeah.
That's another thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's weird because like I think my ex-coach, my MMA coach, he I think he said it best. Trying to learn to fight using Tai Chi would be like nobody boxed for 100 years, and then you found a few still pictures of a boxer performing moves, and then you tried to recreate how they fought just by seeing like a boxer's shadow boxing.
Yeah,
it would be it'd be next to impossible. But to do it, this is why I've got a lot of respect for HEMA, because that is what they've done. They've took a lot of books with still images of fighting technique.
Fight books they're called, aren't they?
Yeah, and then they've sparred it to death until they found out how to use these techniques. And I think that's the approach we need to go back to in Tai Chi. We need to figure out these techniques, spar them until they can be used, and compete against each other to show that what we do actually works.
Yeah, that is going on the assumption that they were for fighting to start with. I mean, I keep looking into the history of Tai Chi, and I sway between. I mean, obviously the people doing it were martial artists, but I quite often sway between the idea that when Yang Luchan was in Beijing teaching the elites how to do Tai Chi, he wasn't really teaching them how to fight. I mean, he could fight. This is assuming he actually existed, of which there is no evidence. However, apart from everyone's stories, right? Assuming that he existed, what he was doing was a commercial operation, right? He was teaching for money.
Yeah.
And a bit like you go to ancient Greece and you get philosophers. They only existed because they were teaching for money. Like if there was no money in it, there wouldn't have been any.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast about the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, how it started, and basically, who was like Hoist Gracie's dad? Yeah, that's it. He was training people for money, and they were basically doing like kind of the usual karate sort of
private
self-defense stuff. Yeah, and then at the end of those classes, all the people go home, and then the Gracie family and their close friends and all the rest of it would roll and do all of the practical stuff that actually worked. And it was like that was the secret style. And when I was listening to it, I was like, well, that's just Chinese martial arts in general. We know that from stories. You've got your indoor students, you've got your outdoor students, and it's the indoor students that learn the real sort of techniques and fighting aspects of the art. And I think, as you say, like with the commercial kind of success of Tai Chi, it's been watered down again and again and again. But I do think you can get back to it working as a system. Like I say, with Dan, we learned things like, double leg takedowns, we learned hip throws, we learned punching and kicking. I mean, Dan was advocating for the calf kick well over, nearly 20 years before it became the game-changing technique that it is in MMA.
That calf kick is well known in Kempo, for instance. It's got its own Japanese name. That has been. I mean, Kempo's like going back to early 20th century, so it's been around a long time. Like all these things that get discovered in MMA are ancient techniques that have been around for a long time. It's just that you need somebody to make them famous, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. A Kimura. You get that one person that really shows the technique to work, and then everybody's doing it. And
it's always in competition, isn't it? It's competition that makes or breaks something, I guess.
Yeah, and I know that challenge fights weren't as prolific as it's made out in the movies and in people's own heads, but challenge fights did exist in the Chinese martial arts, and they would have rule sets. This is what makes them happen. People go, Tai Chi can't compete because it's too deadly. And it's like, but teachers did used to compete against each other, or their students would compete against each other. So they weren't killing each other, they weren't maiming each other. They had to have a rule set, and quite often it was just who could get the other person out of an area, or force them off a platform. That was the rule set. Or if you lay a hand on me, then you win, sort of stuff. In actual fact, the rule sets are way more limited than what MMA is.
Yeah. Another aspect of this whole thing is I think it's not really styles that make a difference. It's training methods. Like you could train Tai Chi and karate. If one of those skills is doing double leg takedowns and calling it either Tai Chi or karate, then they're going to have a massive advantage over anyone who doesn't train that,
Yeah, exactly. And that was why Dan's students were cleaning up in most of the competitions at the time, because they were actually practicing against resistant opponents. And as I say to people all the time, MMA is now its own martial art, and I think you're going to see styles developing where people are going to start calling themselves different. Because quite often you can tell somebody's trained at like an American top team from the way that they fight, or Jackson Winklejohn. Like you can see certain techniques. Like you look at Cowboy Cerrone and Cub Swanson as well. The trainer, you can see by the way they move, the combinations that they put together. They were trained at that gym, and I think that's how styles develop. As you start getting these people that train in these areas, those techniques get passed on. There's a certain amount of mixing, because obviously if something's successful, people copy it. But I think eventually, I do believe you're going to start getting people saying that, instead of it being their style is this or their style is that, it's going to be their style is, American top team or team alpha male, or, that kind of way. And if you stopped fighting, those styles would then develop like Wing Chun has developed, like it's a lot more theory based than practical.
Yeah, exactly. And so I have this argument with Byron Jacobs. I don't know if you know him. He does the Mushin Martial Culture website channel. And he always says to me that MMA is a rule set. And I always say, well, I think it's a style. And we have this good-natured argument about it. But I think, as you're saying, I think it's a style because it will split into sub-styles, like you're saying. And the other argument for things is how you use them in conversation. Like I would say, I'm going to my MMA class tonight. I wouldn't say I'm going to my MMA rules class tonight.
Yeah.
So, like in the same way you'd say I'm going to my karate class tonight. It becomes a style because of the way it's talked about and the way it's thought about.
Yeah, and you now have fighters. In the traditional way of doing it, you do karate or you do boxing or you do Muay Thai, and then you'd learn a bit of jiu-jitsu and a bit of wrestling, and then you'd become like an MMA fighter. Yeah, now a lot of these fighters that are coming out, they started in MMA. They are MMA fighters. They'll still go and have boxing coaches and jiu-jitsu coaches and wrestling coaches, but they started out in MMA.
Yeah.
It's no longer this where you've got to study this one martial art for a decade and then you can branch out and start doing other stuff. It's like, no, from the very beginning, you're learning punches, kicks, takedowns, groundwork.
Yeah.
And
together.
Now you're,
Because it's one thing to learn those things separately. Like if you learn wrestling as wrestling, you'd end up doing things that will get you in trouble in an MMA fight because the rules are different. So you tend to have like the MMA version of wrestling or the MMA version of jiu-jitsu,
Yeah. And that's why, you get Olympic level wrestlers sometimes transition into MMA that aren't quite as successful or can't out wrestle MMA fighters who didn't wrestle to the Olympic level, because there's those other aspects that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, because exactly. Once you get punched in the face, your level drops very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah. That Mike Tyson quote, isn't it? Yeah, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, or what is it? You punch a black belt in the face, and they become a brown belt. You punch them again, they become a purple belt, and it just keeps going down.
And there is that aspect to it too. I know, like training, whenever the jiu-jitsu guys would get a bit uppity about their opinions on something, the MMA fighters would say, well, come to an MMA class, we'll see how well you do. And I think there's a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners out there that are still living off Hoist Gracie's name, like 30 odd years after he did something, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think jiu-jitsu's got its own issues, right? It's in this weird stage where it's is it a sport or is it self-defense? How is it being taught? Because you've got people teaching Gracie jiu-jitsu, and then you've got a lot of those guys who do that Gracie garage thing where they've never actually sparred anyone and they're getting colored belts. You know, it's weird.
It's a. I always like, you know, the rule set for jiu-jitsu from the IBJJF. That's it, because when you look at it, it is kind of it's from a self-defense aspect. You know, the reason you get 4 points per mount is because in a fight you would just grab that person's head and stove them into a pavement. You know, same when you take someone's back. Yes, it's a nice thing to choke them out, but if it was a reality-based thing, you'd be grabbing that person by the neck and stoving their head into the pavement, you know, or elbowing their brainstem. You know, it's knee on belly. You know, you're in a position where you can punch your opponent and they can't hit you. All of these points, you know, passing someone's guard puts you in a much better position to hit that person. The rule set of those competitions promotes a decent understanding of self-defense, should you think properly about what self-defense actually is. You know, there's a lot of jiu-jitsu guys that don't think about self-defense, that if they were in an actual fight would just get stoved in, despite being a lot more skilled than the average person on the street. The first time they get punched in the face, I think they're going to become.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely truth in that, but I think there's also truth in the fact that if you only ever did the sports side of jiu-jitsu, I would still probably put money on you in a fight.
Yeah, absolutely. If it was a one-on-one fight in the street, but I mean, I have seen footage of, you know, blue belts, purple belts in a street situation not be able to get the fight to the ground, and then end up either being embarrassed and walking off or getting beaten up. And I think the argument I have, because people go, yeah, but it's not for the streets. The argument I have is there was a acting coach, can't remember his name. No one would have heard of him anyway. He trained a lot with like Arnold Schwarzenegger and like Jean-Claude Van Damme and all that. And he was asked, what would he rather have? An actor that he had to train martial arts, or a martial artist that he'd have to train to act for, you know, action movies. And he said he'd take the actor every day because the actor already knows how to act. All he needs is a few little bits of martial arts to do what he's doing. Now, I use that same argument for sports, competition, and fighting. Yeah, you already know how to fight. All you need to do is train that person a few little aspects to tweak what they're doing to be able to defend themselves in the street. You can go through self-defense scenarios for 20 years. And if you've never been punched in the face, or you've never had to kick someone off you if they're on top of you, or sweep someone, or, you know, like take a knife off them if they're trying to actually stab you, you're going to be in pretty much the same situation as the sports fighter, only you don't have the same skill set that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very well saying, I'm going to poke you in the eye. Well, if you can't land a jab on my chin, how the hell are you ever going to get fingers into this much smaller target?
Yeah, okay. Well, without damaging them too, because like if you miss the eye and hit something hard, your fingers are ruined, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I definitely don't, you know, like when it's like, oh, like physically force my fingers into your eyes. It's like, that's never happening. Sorry, like you only need to get like a little jab, you know, like a little bit just into the eye, and that person, you get that momentary flinch from it. But the idea that you're gonna, from a strike, jab someone's eyes out in a, you know, Kill Bill kind of way is just absolute Shaw Brothers nonsense.
Yeah, and also the idea that you bite someone and that they'd let go. Like, when the adrenaline's going, if you bite someone, they don't care. Like,
Yeah, exactly that.
It's still going to break your arm. It's not going to stop.
Yeah, but if I'm pulling on your arm and you're biting my leg, that is going to spur me on to pull on your arm harder.
Break it harder.
yeah, that's the thing. It's not going to make me let go. I am going to like, that's hurting. I need to put everything into this to make sure that the fight stops.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I've had I've played around with some of my friends that do martial arts, and like got on the back with a rear naked choke, and they tried to like kind of grab my groin, like to make me let go, and all it does is make me squeeze their neck harder. You know?
Yeah, exactly that.
It doesn't.
It's like that's hurting. I'm going to hurt you back. Like
harder.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it's a ridiculous nonsense. And as I say, the only reality check you can give people is what you've just said. You know, to do it on them.
Yeah, I know. That's the state of martial arts.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to think. What have we worked out here? How do we fix it? What's the process? Do you reckon?
Well, I think like as we know in the jiu-jitsu community, you know, if I'm traveling up north, I can put on a BJJ Underground. What decent clubs are there in Luton? And I'll get 5 or 6 different answers. I'll pick one of those and I'll go along and train. Yeah, you can't do that with Chinese martial arts because they're all so insular. If we want to protect Chinese martial, we need to open it up. We need more people practicing, and we need to be able to train other people. Yes, obviously, my form isn't going to be the same as a Yang stylist, but I should still get enough from a lesson if I go and learn with a Yang stylist that I can do stuff with them. You know, we need more cooperation. We need more sparring. We need more realism. And even for the health aspects of people, you know, if they don't want to train to actually fight, they still need to know what these form movements are in order to perform them properly.
Yeah, having some sort of focus in what you're doing makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I see most forms training now. It's just people wishy-washy, like their hands are disconnected from their body, like they're not moving as they should be. Their stances are high. There's no, you know, that they're moving forwards before their hands are finishing. And or, you know, you only learn the importance of body structure when you know what that movement is actually for.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for doing this little talk. If people want to get involved in whatever it is you're up to, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, yeah, so obviously I've got my YouTube page, In Defense of Traditional Martial Arts. I'm also available on pretty much all of the socials as Al Wycherley. Probably, I should really set up proper pages for the martial arts on those outlets as well, but I'm a busy man.
Yeah.
So, yeah, get in touch. I'd say X or, you know, Twitter is the best place to get hold of me if you want to get in touch about the martial arts.
Hey, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you later on in the year for more episodes.